Hello and welcome to Media Academy Online's Film Diet podcast. I'm Dana.
And I'm Brandon.
And for these next few podcasts, we're going to be diving into the world of horrors.
Horror. The horror.
And it's a interesting genre because it's changed over the decades, where it's kind of now we're getting to the sort of stage where we're seeing some really interesting creative works being done, where for a while there in the 90s it seemed like it was all just slasher films and more slasher films.
Yeah, like the 90s was almost the back burner of the slasher films. Like it was when it was starting to die down, wasn't it?
Yeah,
because the 80s was like pure slashers,
and it kind of felt like the 90s was a stage where Hollywood were trying to make formulas to make money. They thought we could make a certain formula that will make us money. Let's just do it. Where we saw that with a lot of genres, not only horrors, but like animations and things. They said, we're going to try and make formulas, whether it's a story formula or character formula. And if we follow this, it'll keep making us money. Obviously, that's not how films work, but that's how they sort of were trying to approach it.
Yeah, almost like a streamline.
Yeah.
Yep. Sort of put them on a conveyor belt, just bang, 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 bang.
And so that's kind of where we saw what I'd probably say is probably one of the worst eras for horror films.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely the most uninspired era.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
And they all basically tried copying a set film. You know,
because
like Scream or before that.
Yeah, I mean, we had, let's say for example, the 70s, just before the 80s came around. So we had Halloween came out, sort of cemented the popular slasher archetype, if you will. And that sort of set up the rest of the 80s. So you had Friday 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraiser, and a few others. And it was just sequel after sequel after sequel. Almost every year they'd come out with a new one in between each of those franchises. And then after the 80s, coming to the 90s, obviously we had our fill with all that sort of thing. The audience, I guess, was growing sick of it. And they were just starting to become straight to video, very cheaply made, you know, and that's sort of the 90s was kind of that. What do you call it?
It felt like they changed the direction for horrors to just teenagers, really.
Yeah. I guess with Scream, and that was probably the major one, which was probably 95 or something. I think that came out around that time, and I think that really cemented once again the teens being the main focus. Yeah, and that's being the main kind of marketing for the films.
And unfortunately, that sort of gave birth to a lot of ridiculous
urban legend. I Know What You Did Last Summer. Those kind of films that copied Scream, you know, and sort of carried on that.
And it got to the stage where they were just laughable.
Yeah,
and everyone was trying to copy them because that was the in thing. And even like the low budget ones, they were just silly. The acting was terrible.
Woeful.
They
uninspired.
Yeah, there was no character development at all. It was all just
no story development.
No story development either.
Yeah.
And you could pick in the first 5 minutes. They would deliberately write a character to be not likable. He's dead first.
Yeah, you'd have the jock that was an asshole. You'd have the geek. You'd have the stoner. You'd have the bimbo blonde. Yeah. You'd have, you know, the main brunette who's probably the smarter girl that survives, and that kind of. Those character archetypes kind of were played on later on in that movie, Cabin in the Woods, you know, how they sort of use that as their kind of way of tackling that genre by utilising all those tropes and doing it in a creative way. But anyway.
Yeah. But luckily, moving on into the 2000s, we started to see more creative films get made. That was kind of the birth of like the Blumhouse era, where there's a lot of Blumhouse.
And James Wan.
Yeah,
with the supernatural stuff. Sort of in tandem at the same time, I think. They were both sort of starting up, and maybe James Wan might have been a bit before that, because I think he did Saw. And he started off with Saw and then moved on from there, and it did Insidious and Conjuring and
Yeah.
And that kind of just exploded.
And that's basically the birth of popular horror.
Yeah, very bankable
Yeah.
films.
And they're the kind of films where you can spend $5 million, $10 million, $20 million, which is nothing really for the kind of budgets we have for films these days. But you can make like easy $500 million at the box office.
Yeah. I mean, even let's say a $20 million budget for Insidious or whatnot, 25, it was probably making 150 mil, you know, and that's just in box office.
That's right. Yeah.
And all the other shit after that. Yeah, I think coming back, I'd like to just reset and sort of wind back the clock for a second before we get into the more recent stuff. I'd just like to go back to a bit of history with horror and effects. So I think my first experience with horror would have been watching Jaws. I think that was the first one that had a major impact on me, and that basically doesn't show or reveal anything, as we all know, until like the last third of the movie.
Yeah.
Or even then, I mean, it's very very small segments and moments in the film, but it's just the underlying tension.
Yeah, it's a kind of film that when you think about it, you think you see a lot of the shark, a lot of the creature in it, but you really don't. There's only a handful of shots, and all those shots were done with animatronics, are done mechanically. So it was really interesting to see them use a relatively new technology at the time, and use it in creative ways to sort of develop a creature or an antagonist for a film such as that. And it really got segmented into the culture very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Went a long way to scaring people off going into the water.
Oh, big time. Like, this is my story. Like, just after watching that film, I'd see my imagination would create a shark fin in my lounge room. And, you know, I couldn't put my feet on the floor because I thought it would come up through the floor.
Yeah.
I wasn't even at the beach and I was bloody shit scared.
And that's the other thing about that film is that
Yeah.
it wasn't a film that was trying to be eerie and dark and moody. It was sunny. It was perfect beach weather. But you look down and you can't see anything. Yeah. So they're using that whole contradiction between nice sunny day at the beach with what's underneath you, the dark, murky water.
Yeah, it works a charm in that film. You know, and I still stand by that. That's one of the greatest films in that, you know, trying to create so much with so little.
Not only did that segment the whole genre in a lot of people's minds, it also set a career for Spielberg.
Oh, yeah. Definitely cemented his career and his style.
Yeah. And he continued that for quite a while, which was really good to see. That was sort of his golden era of filmmaking.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let's not talk about his filmmaking these days, but at that stage it was great. It was great to sort of see that.
It was fun. It was creative.
Yeah.
It was scary. It was funny. It was
everything.
He could put everything into it.
I feel that sometimes when people make film, if they make a film that's meant to be, let's say, scary, they try not to have any fun because they want people to always feel like that tension.
Like 100%.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with throwing in a few funny jokes or just making things a bit whimsical and a bit different.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. And there's no reason why we have to do that either. I feel that a lot of film education these days is all about, you know, understand the genre and that's what you have to stick with.
Adhere to.
Yeah.
A human being is not just 100% one way, you know, like
That's right.
we kind of do need many different things to make it interesting and for it to last. Ghostbusters is a good example of a film that came out, I think, the real early 80s, if not 81 or something. Anyway, that was a good blend of horror and comedy, you know.
Yeah, and it was. Yeah,
because you watch that as a kid and you're having fun, but you're getting scared at the same time, so it's a good balance.
Moving on from there, I guess my first experience was a film that isn't strictly a horror film, but it's got horror elements.
Yep.
Jurassic Park.
Yeah, yeah.
Where that was the first film to use visual effects as we know them, not only in horror films but in any film really, where all the wider shots of the dinosaurs were all CG done in the computer, and this was a first for the time. At that stage, I mean, even the early development of Jurassic Park, they were still going to do things with, whether it might be puppetry or stop motion. That was kind of the direction they were going. And it was the creatives at ILM who said, we've got this new technology and we think you should give it a go. And luckily, Steven Spielberg, who we were just talking about before, took a gamble and said, I think we can use this technology in a different way.
Yeah.
But what I like about that film is not only did it use visual effects, but it also did use puppetry and mechanical...
Used every trick available in the cupboard.
Where these days, when we look at a film and they have like a close-up of the character or a dinosaur, whatever it might be, it's all CG.
Yeah.
They don't really shy away from just zooming in on the 3D model of the character and saying that'll do, but...
For the most part, it seems like they are just really pushing for more CGI, and it's less work, I suppose, across different departments.
I mean, it is. It's because basically the way that the industry works is that all the visual effects are done by a completely different company.
Yeah.
It's sort of like outsourced. So.
And they're not as involved, are they? Because they're not... Like Peter Jackson is a good example of someone who is involved every step of the way and has used every trick in recent films. Yeah. And we do have films that are coming out that still do that. We've got the latest Blade Runner, Star Wars Force Awakens, and that they're using a lot of puppetry and whatnot. So there is that happening still, but it's on a small fraction of
going
stuff.
Back to the original Jurassic Park, just to sort of explain what elements did use the sort of the puppetry and the mechanical elements. Basically, all the wider stuff was done CG, but then you'd have like a close-up of like for instance, when they had the raptors walking into the kitchen scene, that was a perfect one where you could see there was a puppet looking through that window and then coming through that door. And that sort of blended the reality. If they used a CG character for that, especially not only then, but even today, it wouldn't have that same sort of
impact or that feeling of it actually being there.
And another scene to highlight another point is, for instance, when they had the T-Rex and the children in the car, and then the T-Rex sort of pushes down on the glass and they're holding onto that glass. That was a real mechanical T-Rex head that they built for that. These days, they're just like, we'll just do it in post. Doesn't matter. But you don't have that same sort of interaction and that same sort of connection to the characters that you do when you've got a real life thing pushing up against them.
It's way more immersive.
Yeah.
You can, I think, even for the actors, and that translates to the audience, especially when our generations that saw CGI evolve and get better. Like, we probably need more grounding in that to sort of believe it, whereas new kids these days probably prefer more CGI than the other tricks.
They're probably more used to it. They like what they're used to. Yeah.
I mean, I'm interested to find out that if that's actually true or not. But I think for me personally, I don't care how dodgy the puppet looks. Yeah. It kind of
at least they're interacting.
And it has a charm to it.
It's hard to fake. When the muscles of a person pushing up against something, or just the interaction element of it is very difficult.
And it always looks a bit funny.
Yeah, and it's just like if you look at a film these days where you might have a person patting a CG character with their hand, and it doesn't feel real.
It still doesn't feel real.
And we might get there eventually, but it'll take time.
How long do you reckon?
Well, the hardest thing is getting over that uncanny valley stage.
Yeah.
For those who don't know what that is, it's basically the closer to more realistic characters we go, less believable it is to us, because it's really hard to sort of get the muscles, the facial features in a character, or the eyes, the pupils in the eyes, just looking realistic. As you get closer to realism, the faces look a bit more rubbery, or the eyes, they look a bit creepy or a bit not quite right.
Not natural.
You can tell something's not quite right.
Yeah.
And it's just getting past that valley stage, that bump, to where we believe this now.
Yeah. And it's a difficult thing, because like when you think about a CGI character, like especially a humanoid, the more humanoid you get, the harder it is to kind of achieve. Like Rogue One, the Star Wars film that came out, and they did Princess Leia and the Tarkin character, a few CGI characters who are supposed to be human and they're interacting with humans. And yeah, it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
I know. I was still saying, yeah, it looks good, but it's still not quite there.
Yeah, you can tell. You can just tell that something's not quite right.
And it's funny, like the amount of information that would go into just the normal human being's movements of their face. You know, it's like all that information that we recognize and we pick up, but all that other information that we don't even think about.
Yeah.
That kind of makes us realistic, and you know, there's those movements, the body movements and stuff that, you know, you're not thinking about, all those extra little bits.
Yeah, and it's hard because if you think about maybe a film like Planet of the Apes, to us that's 100% believable, but a person who we see every day, it's a harder thing to get your head around.
Yeah,
because we know what people look like. We just do, and trying to fool that is a huge challenge.
If not impossible.
Yeah, if not impossible. I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, me too. But yeah, like coming back, Planet of the Apes, you know, they were probably one of the better ones these days that have done characters that you know that you really that I invested myself in and thought, wow, that, you know, it's a good character. The Caesar character worked really well thanks to Andy Serkis and Weta, you know, pushing those boundaries and really refining that effect, you know, the mocap.
Yeah, there's basically, to sort of give you the rundown, basically Weta, they've been pioneering the whole the mocap system, so the motion capture system and the facial recognition and the facial capture.
Ever since Lord of the Rings with Gollum, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That was the first one.
Yeah.
And then after that, then they sort of moved
King Kong, and then there was Tintin and many more after that.
And that was kind of, I guess they were the first people to put people at ease with the whole development of CG. Everyone thought, oh, that's it, all actors are going to have no jobs. But then basically Weta said, we're going to get the character to perform, and we're going to translate that performance into a digital environment. And they've sort of been refining that as much as they can, and you know,
it's looking good.
Yeah, and it's we get into a stage where anything that isn't a human character, we're pretty much there.
Pretty much there now, aren't we? Yeah, and I'm always impressed by their work. You know, like even if the movie's not great, like Mortal Engines, the more recent ones. Yeah. Just some of the effects work and stuff in those films, you're just like, wow.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying that was a beautiful film. That was really well done. I mean, you know, it missed the mark with a lot of things, but it was...
Visually, it was just like, stunning. Wow. If you had a good story and good characters and acting and, you know, on par with the visuals, it'd be amazing, you know. Yeah. It really would be amazing. It'd be like Lord of the Rings again for me. Yeah. Like looking at Jurassic Park and, you know, contrasting the old one with the new one.
Yeah,
that's a good sort of way to sort of see the difference in filmmaking.
I mean, if we look at Jurassic Park and compare that to, say, Jurassic World, which is like their sort of the revamp of the whole, you know,
franchise,
the IP. They put a lot of nostalgic things in there, and there's a lot of sort of little hints that people like our age who sort of grew up with the original one, the original three, I suppose, could sort of take away. But I think what they missed the mark on is that they had no restraint. Sort of with new technology, the better the technology available, they sort of just threw it in our face. With the original Jurassic Park, it felt like you would always see the dinosaurs from the character's point of view.
Yeah.
And moving on to the Jurassic World, they were like, we can do cinematography anyway. We'll just put the camera wherever we want, and we won't really think about it because we can.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel there needs to be intent with the cinematography as well.
And I think that's what Spielberg was a master at, you know, in those, particularly in those era of films that he was doing, like Close Encounters, E.T., you name it, all his sort of sci-fi movies. His human element is the thing that drives the films, and that's what makes everything else believable, and that's what sort of sets up a strong foundation for everything else to work.
Yeah, and even if we talk about E.T. for a second, like that character was unbelievable as anything. You knew it was a puppet straight away, but you didn't care. No. And that's the point, that we don't need to always be pushing for 100% photorealistic characters that look like they're 100% in the environment, because what makes and breaks a film is the characters,
Yeah.
and creating a character that you can love and you can get emotion from, a puppet that you can get emotion
It's
from.
pretty crazy.
That's probably the easiest thing to say, but the hardest thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. And you had films like Dark Crystal and Star Wars, you know, Yoda and the many other puppets and characters in that era of films. And I don't know, it has a charm to it, has a human element to it, and it's warm, it's not cold.
Yeah.
You can connect with it,
Yeah.
and you believe it when it's on screen. You might laugh at it because it, you know, may look funny, but you can't deny that it is actually there.
That's right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Moving on from there, the most recent film that I can think of that sort of was shouting from the rooftops about its visual effects, but to me it missed the mark, was Alita, Battle Angel.
Yeah.
Where they were trying, they said this is going to be 100% photorealistic character that is completely believable, and that's fine. But I struggled to relate to that character just because of the visuals.
Yeah, I kind of didn't relate at all. You know, I felt distanced to the whole film.
And I tried. I really wanted to like it because they are trying to push the boundaries.
I mean, I like Robert Rodriguez.
Yeah.
I like James Cameron. I like the actors, you know. Everything, all the parts are good, you know, and this is the problem. You can have all the parts in place and they can all be good, but then it's the approach of the filmmaking where it's lacking.
The thing that I don't get is that they made the character Alita, the face of Alita, look exactly like the actor of that character. So I don't know why they just didn't stick with the character, the actor's head, face, and then just CG the rest of the body. Because it's much easier to make a believable body than it is a face. So I understand they want to push the boundaries of technology, but I kind of think maybe they should have wound back a little bit and just said, we'll just stick with the character's face, just live action, and then...
Because I always find myself just watching these films, like I'm looking at those effects, and that's what I'm watching. I'm not watching the film, I'm watching effects.
Yeah.
And the whole time I'm just sitting there going, did that work? Did this work? Why isn't that not working? This is what's happening.
There was a few shots where they just stood out. It just took me straight out of the film. And it was just like, oh, come on, that is not believable.
I'd like to see that movie redone with, proper effects, not just CGI, I should say.
I don't want to see these rubbery faces trying to be realistic. It is just hard to believe that.
Yeah. It's like putting Pixar characters into a real movie and then expecting you to go, oh, yeah.
And that's the thing, like a Pixar film works well as a Pixar film because we know that's not real, and they're not trying to fool us about that.
No.
They're saying this is the film, these are the characters, and we go for the ride.
Off you go, yeah.
And then we can watch a live action film, believe it 100%, but it's trying to mix the two, which is very difficult.
It's a fine line.
And unfortunately, it does take you out of the story.
It does.
And you don't want it to. You want to try and be along for the ride. But unfortunately, one dodgy shot or just the mix just doesn't work.
Yeah. I just found it very jarring.
Yeah.
Which, it sucks because I love the anime and all the elements to it, like I said, but it's just something about it that...
Yeah. And to me, I think it just comes down to the leader, the character. That one, if I cut out all of her shots and just watch the other shots by themselves, it'll probably be fine.
Yeah.
But it's just that they just tried to shove technology down our throats and say, look how great we are. Which is, I don't want to hate it because they're pushing boundaries, but I also want it to stand up as a film for itself. So maybe it's not about trying to make leaps and bounds in technology, just baby footsteps.
Yeah. It's funny because going back, had Jurassic Park and Terminator 2. And Terminator 2 utilising the liquid metal man, that... I mean, that was probably the only CGI thing in Terminator 2. And that was that's the way it works because he got one element, one character that's CGI, but not all the time. Just when he's going through his changes and stuff like that, when he's terminating. Yeah,
and I mean, that's liquid. They just said, we're going to stick with this liquid effect, which is fine because it's not realistic.
It's kind of like a one-use thing, and it's you just kind of accept it and it works, But you got an actor to play it. So it's kind of like... Yeah, I don't know what Alita, when you compare those two ideas.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to, I just wish they kept the real actor's face.
It makes sense.
Yeah, especially when they look so identical.
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
Cool. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next podcast.
Keep watching and adios.